After the Civil War had ended and the Reconstruction of the United States began, another opportunity for westward expansion and economic development would soon open for the United Union. The beginning of this era would actually start during the Civil War, with the creation of the first transcontinental railroad. There would be two primary railroad companies who would take on this task: the Union Pacific, starting from Omaha, Nebraska, building west, and the Central Pacific, starting from Sacramento, going eastward. Both companies would make good progress as they hired immigrants to help with construction of the tracks. On May 10th, 1869, the two railroads would be ceremoniously connected, with the final rail tie being made of gold to mark the connection between the Pacific and the Atlantic. A few years later, in 1883, four more railroads would be completed, connecting New Orleans, Los Angeles, Santa Fe, Kansas City, Duluth, Minnesota, Seattle, Washington, St. Paul, and the Atchison. While all the progress on creating the transcontinental railroads was nice, they ended up being a bit of a waste, as most were built in remote areas with not much going on there. Then there would be the mining frontier. It started in 1849 in California, when James Marshall found gold in a sawmill in Sonoma, California. After that, various other gold rushes would occur along the American West. Prospectors could look for gold by themselves with just a shovel and a gold pan, hoping to strike rich. There'd also be companies who had much more funding than individual prospectors. Companies could employ experienced miners from around the world who use complex mining methods like deep shaft mining. California wouldn't just be the only place with these mining groups, however, as gold and silver strikes would be found all over the states of South Dakota, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, and Arizona. The continued influx of prospectors would help to populate the western frontier even more. As many places, the populations would increase dramatically, like when 100,000 miners came to Pikes Peak, Colorado, when gold was found there. After $340 million in gold and silver was found in Nevada territory, Nevada was able to receive its statehood in 1864. The states of Idaho and Montana would also receive their statehood earlier and thought after mining booms occurred there. After gold or silver would be found, a boomtown would quickly be established. These boomtowns were well known for their saloons and questionable justice. However, most boomtowns would eventually turn into ghost towns once the gold or silver had run out, from time to time. Some towns would make it through, however, growing into successful cities, and some turning into the cities you know today, like San Francisco, Denver, and Sacramento. In addition to the mining boom, there was also the farming frontier. For livestock, cattle were originally taken along long cattle drives where cowboys would guide cows along a long journey across the United States. This would eventually come to an end, however, as after Joseph Glidden invented barbed wire in 1874, homesteaders would set up long barbed wire fences which could cut off access to what used to be open ranches. By the 1890s, the Wild West would not be so wild anymore, as most of it had been tamed. After the Homestead Act in 1862 was passed, hundreds of thousands of families would flock west to cover the Great Plains and farms. Even though the Homestead Act in theory would have made the land free, many families would end up having to buy the land anyway, as many railroad companies had bought it up already. Unfortunately, the Great Plains would prove to be not the easiest place to start a living in farming. Long hot summers followed by severe winters would make growing crops difficult to grow. The price of crops would also fall, while the price of new machinery would only increase. There would still be some success though, as smart farmers would adopt the dry farming method, which included deep plowing techniques allowing for moisture underneath the soil to be accessed. Farming technology would advance throughout the 1800s as cash crops like corn or wheat would become some of the most profitable. Farms would become more and more industrialized, as smaller farms would not be able to afford advanced equipment that only larger farms had. As production of crops increased more and more, prices would begin to drop as deflation occurred. Farmers would need to grow as much crop as possible in order to pay off debts, though the more they grew, the more prices dropped further. Over time, farmers would begin to feel victimized as society changed. By the year 1900, only 37% of the population would be farmers, almost half the amount there was in the 1860s. Middlemen, wholesalers, and retailers would also take large profit cuts before selling to farmers. Companies in charge of transporting crops and storing them then would also charge increased amounts. After enough time, farmers had grown tired of being exploited and decided to fight back. The National Grange Movement would start in 1868 after being founded by Oliver H. Kelly. The Grange Movement was communities of farmers working together in an attempt to cut out the middleman. They would create cooperatives where farmers would be in charge of businesses themselves. Some Grange movements, farmers would even lobby in government to pass certain Granger laws that would make it illegal for railroads to fix prices by pools. This would lead to the Ocala platform. This was when farmers met in Ocala, Florida, to discuss the issues with rural America. It was a proposed set of laws that would have called for graduated tax rates, lower tariff rates, a new banking system, redirect elections of U.S. senators, and demand for the Department of Treasury to use silver to increase inflation.